there, I'm Noel Hacegaba, Deputy Executive Director at the Port of Long Beach. Welcome to Supply Chain Insight, where we explore the latest trends, issues, and news in the supply chain with top industry leaders, experts, and influencers. Our objective is to bring you the insight you need to help keep your cargo moving. Now, today's business executives expect a lot from their supply chains: efficiency, velocity, flexibility, cost management, and operational excellence. Supply Chain Insight brings the supply chain to you, one segment at a time, to explore new approaches and innovative solutions that will help you and the Port of Long Beach deliver greater value to our customers and partners. Today's episode highlights the critical role that the warehouse and industrial real estate sector plays in supporting port operations and the entire goods movement system. To illustrate the value of this vital sector in the supply chain, there are nearly 2 billion square feet, that's 2 billion with a B, of warehouse and distribution center space located within 75 miles of the Port of Long Beach, in an area known as the Inland Empire. Now, having this massive amount of industrial real estate in close proximity to the nation's busiest port complex enables us to handle more than 20 million container units on an annual basis and helps to keep cargo flowing and the economy moving. Now, to tell us more about the state of the warehouse sector and the industrial real estate industry in general, our special guest today is Mac Hewett, Senior Managing Director for JLL. Mac specializes in the big box industrial real estate sector throughout the Inland Empire, Central Valley, and Greater Southern California markets. He's also a recognized leader within JLL's supply chain consulting practice, assisting corporations of all sizes implement network optimization, site selection strategy, and real estate solutions nationally. In fact, since joining JLL in 2014, Mac has successfully negotiated over 30 million square feet of real estate transactions valued in excess of $1.5 billion. Mac, welcome to Supply Chain Insight. Thanks for joining us today to give us a pulse of the warehouse sector and to share your insight on where you see the supply chain and the industrial real estate industry headed. We're going to jump right into the questions, Mac. Since the start of the import surge in December of 2020, the warehouse vacancy rate has reached an all-time low across the United States, but especially in the Inland Empire. What is the current status of the industrial real estate space and the capacity that's available in the Southern California region today?
Yeah, this is a really good time to be having this conversation, because if you asked me that question, I don't know, 30 days ago, I might have a slightly different answer. But today, real time, what we're seeing is two very distinct conversations. And one really starts with the capital markets side, which has been completely thrown upside down by the debt markets and the macroeconomic factors of the Fed's decision to keep raising interest rates. What we use as a typical benchmark to value these buildings is the cap rate, or the return effectively on an in-place lease. Before, you could sell something for a 2.5% to 3% cap rate because it would pencil to a 3.5% cap on the projected future rent, not even the in-place rent, but what do we think we're going to get in a year from now? In the last kind of 30 to 45 days, it's been completely thrown out the window, and most big institutional investors or even small investors have effectively eliminated rent growth, are solving to a 4 to 5% return or cap rate based on the in-place rents. And the effect of that has been a 10 to 15% drop in the building, call it per square foot values, effectively overnight. And it's really, again, it's a really unique position to be in, because on the other side, when we look at the tenants, which is this conversation too, and this is my day-to-day, is the leasing and really the tenant demand for buildings. And you mentioned that the market is just shy of 2 billion feet of buildings in Southern California. And really that's represented in 3 major submarkets across the basin. You've got the LA, call it proper submarket, Orange County, and then the Inland Empire. Of those markets, the vacancy rate, which is effectively empty space that you could move into tomorrow, is at unheard of low levels. LA is 0.7%, Orange County is 1.4%, and the Inland Empire is 0.4%. Wow. To put that into perspective, a healthy or balanced market, if you will, somewhere between 5 to 7%. So there's an extreme imbalance in the market, and it's given landlords really incredible pricing power And I think we're going to talk a little bit later on what the future looks like as a relief valve for that. But right now, what we're seeing is there's still strong tenant demand. Companies are looking at their supply chain and looking at their investments in these buildings as long-term views. So call it recent events of interest rates and how the capital markets has changed the view isn't really affecting the tenants. So it's creating these two, again, very distinct conversations, which don't know if I know the actual answer to either or, but certainly that's what we're seeing today.
Well, Mac, thank you very much for that insight. I mean, certainly how these macro factors that appear to be changing day by day have affected the industrial real estate sector over the last 30, 45 days. Very interesting and insightful. Let's take a step back and look at this with a broader lens. How has the pandemic affected retail and e-commerce inventory levels? And what's been the impact specifically on the industrial real estate sector over the last 24 months or so?
Yeah, so obviously the couple months post-pandemic was a big shock to everyone, right? It started with the stockouts in the grocery stores. We all remember the toilet paper fiasco. Then it started to change to you're all locked in your house, so you're going to buy stuff online, and e-commerce started to go kind of through the roof. I remember so vividly that, I mean, and this I think is a good place to start, is your Amazon Prime went from 2-day delivery to 2 weeks, right? Stuff that you typically got and it showed up the next day. All of a sudden it said, hey, maybe you'll get it in a week or two, but we don't really know. One of the big metrics we've always paid attention to, but really there was a spotlight on it, was e-commerce as a percentage of all retail sales. And kind of end of 2019, early 2020, before the onset of the pandemic, that number sat at about 12 to 14%, depending on who you ask. The second half of 2020, that number jumped to, and again, it depends on who you ask because there's different studies out there, but we'll call it kind of 17 to 20%. There was a study done, I think it was by McKinsey, but I may be wrong because I'm thinking back 2 years. But effectively it said we compressed 10 years of natural e-commerce adoption into 6 months. And that shock to the system is really was the catalyst for most companies to really think about supply chain, right? And why supply chain is the center of so many decisions today. And also think about the real estate, because all of a sudden, e-commerce was a critical component of your business. You need to have the infrastructure investment to support e-commerce. And what that means is warehouse space with close proximity to population bases. So that shock to the system from just how people order and consume goods and where they come from and what's the consumer expectation has really had this profound effect on industrial real estate because it's put it at the spotlight of demand. And we really haven't been able to keep up with that, even though, there's statistics show that e-commerce as a percentage of sales is peeling back a little bit. I think right now it's sitting at about 15%. But put that into perspective, big picture, we went from 12% to 18% to 15% over the last 2 years. And this is the shock to the system that we've seen. And I think what's even wilder to think about is there's some countries, China, for instance, at one point post-pandemic, 50% of all of their sales were e-commerce sales. So if I think about just the runway that we potentially have there, I don't even know what it could mean for the demand for distribution space and really the strain on what supply chain could really happen.
And when you think about it, e-commerce fulfillment requires placing that product in close proximity to the end customer. So that definitely drives a need for industrial real estate, right? And having inventory sufficient to be able to meet those purchases online, which, like you said, accelerated post-pandemic. Thank you for that. That was very fascinating. And there's no reason to believe that e-commerce is going to continue to slow down. I think over time, as most consumers get more comfortable, it's only going to continue to increase. Which brings me to the next question. Do you foresee any substantial increase in warehouse capacity in the near future?
Unfortunately, no. And this rings true not just in Southern California, but across the country. There is a robust development pipeline in the major markets across the country and also in Southern California. But the reality is it's a lot of concrete and steel, and it still takes a long time to build these buildings. So and supply chain problems have hit this development pipeline as well. What used to take 9 or 10 months, which is still a long time, you can't deliver a building overnight. But what used to take 9 or 10 months now takes 15 to 18 months from start to finish. And it takes a tremendous amount of pre-planning. The steel industry and steel availability was one of the biggest kind of hit items when we look at development. It used to be you could kind of order your steel in lockstep with the development as the timeline proceeded. Now you almost have to plan around steel delivery because the lead times are so long. The latest we're hearing is switchgear for electrical that supplies the power to the building. There's delays there upwards of 6 to 10 months. So you really have to be ahead of every step to get a building delivered on time. And then if we look at how much product has delivered specifically in Southern California, we're starting to see issues with getting the power on and getting permits approved because there's so much demand going through the utility companies and going through the cities. They're backlogged as well because of COVID. So it just takes a lot more to get these buildings up and running and delivered than I think it used to. And you layer that in with the tenant demand, the new way that tenants are looking at these buildings as investments. They're thinking further ahead. So they're by nature taking buildings that are kind of further out. So it's definitely an issue, and it's what's led to these record low vacancy rates and these low availability rates. But yeah, the short answer there is no, because it still takes a long time to deliver a building, and you can't just pop them up overnight.
You know, the lack of warehouse capacity here in Southern California was quickly felt across the supply chain. In fact, at one point, Mac, there were 109 ships at anchor that were effectively serving as warehouses on water. There were containers that were piling up inside port terminals for days and weeks, and even chassis were being used as makeshift warehouses. So one of the ways that we responded here at the Port of Long Beach is we repurposed vacant land that we had available. And today we've activated over 100 acres of vacant land for the temporary storage of containers at Pier S. And we call this our store operation, which stands for short-term overflow resource. And that, by the way, was the original pop-up yard that has since been replicated in ports across the country. But the point is, this provided immediate relief to our terminals, and it kept containers moving through the system. Is this a glimpse of the future? I mean, do you see ports and other stakeholders in the system repurposing land for surge capacity in the future?
I don't even think it's a glimpse. It is real time happening now. And it's actually pretty cool to see, because along with this changing nature of consumer demand, companies are solving for their distribution models to be more efficient. And one of the things that we've seen and are seeing in real time right now is the rise of a concept called ISF, or iOS in some cases. And what that stands for is industrial service facilities, and iOS is industrial outdoor storage. And it's exactly that. So these industrial service facilities are yards for storage for trailers or containers. They are transload facilities. They're cross-dock facilities. They're maintenance facilities, because there's more goods moving means more trucks on the road. And that doesn't necessarily mean 53 footers. It could be vans, it could be whatever, but you need maintenance facilities to keep those trucks moving and keep the goods moving. So we're seeing in real time this brand new demand for exactly that type of space. And yeah, you guys were, I think, one of the first to the punch by just the necessity of, we got to get this stuff stored somewhere so these ships can keep moving. But it's really unlocked, and we're seeing, again, in real time, this evolution in every major market across the country of a need for these low coverage facilities. And the easiest way to do it is to repurpose that land, or allow it at least to go, call it zoned industrial, so that you can store containers or trucks or whatever it may be on it. So yeah, absolutely. You guys are on the leading edge of one of the fastest changing, call it, segments of the industrial real estate market.
Well, Mac, what's that old saying, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? When we were pressed for additional capacity, that was one of the actions we took. In addition to expanding hours of operation and announcing a fee, which we have not had to collect, but has met its intended objective. So, Matt, at the risk of putting you on the spot, what is your outlook for the Southern California industrial real estate market over the next 6 to 12 months? Do you see things going back to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon, or what's your sense?
I don't see us going backwards. I think it's going to continue to get tighter. You've got record port volumes. I think year to date, and you can fact check me on this, but I think year to date we're 50,000 between LA and Long Beach together. We're 50,000 containers ahead of last year. In loaded imports. There is no outlet. I mean, LA Long Beach brings in 40% of our goods. The alternative ports, which being, if you look on the East Coast, you've got Newark or Houston or Savannah, they're all backed up. The rail yards are backed up. At the end of the day, where the stuff's manufactured, Asia to Southern California, and then points there east is still the fastest way to get goods anywhere in the country. And then if you add to that, I'm just kind of keep piling on, but add to that the Indo-Pacific trade deal, it may not come from China, but it's still going to come from Asia, and it still is going to have to get on a boat and cross the Pacific and come to the U.S. And again, we're the first stop. That's just the inbound piece, obviously. So again, inbound, we are destination number one in Southern California. On the outbound piece, and you and I have talked about this before, is there's 30 million people that live within the 1 to 2 day truck drive of Los Angeles. And again, the new consumer demand is I want my stuff as fast as possible. So there's always a need, even if stuff doesn't come here and it's an import center, the delivery side of it, there's absolutely a need for it. It's the population center of the West Coast effectively, or the Western US. So you layer those together and there really is no opportunity to go backwards. Plus, we've had so much development. We're having to push further east, but there's really only so far you can go, again, to be within that 1 to 2 truck drive or 1 to 2 day truck drive, and to be economical to dray stuff from the port to the warehouse. So it really is call it a collection of a handful of pieces, but every one of those pieces is the supply chain at the end of the day. So I don't see a world where we go backwards, just based on these, call it macroeconomic trends, and the consumer demand. Certainly there's things that maybe could slow it down. I know today we're talking about heightened inventory levels, and the biggest name retailers are slashing prices, trying to move that inventory. But it's funny. It's almost like a double-edged sword in a good way for industrial real estate, because if there's super high inventory levels, you need more warehouse space. If there's flow through the facility, that's what these facilities are now designed for, is to flow through and deliver faster. So whichever way the world starts to move from a consumer demand perspective, it bodes well for the need for industrial space.
You know, what you just said confirms what I've been saying, Mac, that if we ever do go back to normal, it's going to be a new normal, right? It's not going to be the same old normal. And you referenced our cargo volumes, and I think it would be important for our audience to know that for the first half of the year, January through June, we're already 5% ahead of last year. And so that import surge that began the summer of 2020 has not let up. It's been this continuous wave. So here's my next question for you, Mac. What advice do you have for importers in light of the current status of warehouse capacity availability? What advice do you have for importers who are looking for space in the U.S.?
The first one would be, you can never be too early. If you think you need space or you are planning ahead, there is no too early of a time to get in the market or start educating yourself around whatever market you might need to be in or want to be in, and looking at buildings. Again, your hand may be forced to make a decision before you like it, but the odds are you make that decision today, you're going to be in a better position than you will be tomorrow. If you look at Southern California specifically, the data over the last decade, it's been a continued increase in rents and a continued decrease in available buildings. and a pretty steady increase in net absorption, which is a big metric we use to effectively say how much space is getting taken down annually. So the demand has continued to grow, the available buildings has continued to steadily fall, and rents have obviously continued to grow as a result of both of those things. So you can never be too early. The other thing is, especially for importers and 3PLs, it's more important than ever to stay on top of the market, and to kind of actively be running a mark-to-market analysis based on either your portfolio or where you want to be of buildings, because the rates are just changing so fast that it's hard to keep up. You can't just once a year say, hey, where am I? Where's my rate compared to market? You need to be doing it at least quarterly. Otherwise, you're going to miss the mark. And what's interesting is, from a real estate perspective, we just look at the rent. But when you start to peel back, what does that rent actually do to an importer or a 3PL? That's a number that gets factored into what their customers get charged. So if all of a sudden the rents go up 3x or 2x, that ripple effect backwards sometimes isn't seen, but has major ramifications on how these companies can operate. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, it's more important than ever to stay on top of where you want to be, plan ahead, and really educate yourself on what's going on in the market specific to the building itself, which again used to be an afterthought, but now is right there as one of the key decision-making criteria to the supply chain as a whole.
Yeah, Mac, on behalf of our viewing audience and our customers who are listening, thank you for offering that insight and advice. I can't bring our conversation to a close without asking you this last question. Given the events of the past 24 months, what lessons can we all learn to help us better optimize industrial real estate capacity across the system?
Yeah, and I think this, the last 24 months has been really amazing to see the transition of how companies operate as a whole and how supply chain sits within the view of a company. And again, we've talked about this as supply chain kind of used to be the afterthought. It was a necessary evil. It was a cost suck, and you just kind of dealt with it. And now the biggest companies in the world are thinking ahead to say, how can I use supply chain to my advantage? How can I become more efficient? How can I drive profitability? How can I drive top line revenue with a better supply chain? And I think the world has now started to adopt that and see that. And for the first time ever, again, supply chain is a cool topic. It's a cool conversation piece, right? And the real estate sits there right along with it. Is the real estate used to be the industrial real estate, obviously the distribution center, used to be the tail end of it. It was okay. You need more space. Somebody local can go find a building. Well, now you have real estate departments within a lot of these companies, and they report directly to the chief supply chain officers of some of the biggest corporations in the world. So I think that change is really going to drive the future of how do you better optimize and use industrial buildings and warehouses. Again, we're starting to see companies think longer term. It's no longer a 10-year lease or a 5-year lease. It's a 30-year investment in the future of the company. And again, driving profitability. So these buildings are being designed better. They're becoming more efficient in nature. And sometimes they're even getting smaller because you can go vertical, or you can create a better box. So that, I think, is really the biggest lesson of change we've seen. And I think, again, this is going to continue in the future, and only make the economy as a whole more efficient. What I do think is important to stress there, though, is from a political side, from a state level, county level, city level, government entity, there needs to be a consideration for this. And the education piece kind of has to happen as well. When a city is adopting a general plan, they need to understand what these industrial uses mean, not just to their economy, but how they actually operate. When counties or states are looking at passing regulations on development or industrial or how the trucks operate, those potential measures have serious impacts on both from a positive or a negative on how the supply chain will operate into the future. So I think that piece is really important to look at. Again, not to say we've done anything wrong just yet, but we can take those lessons of the last 24 months, like you said, and we can apply them to how do we make a better future. And again, it comes down to a more efficient supply chain.
Mac, you hit it right on the head of the nail, and there's a line I like to use that confirms what you just said, and that is that the invisible supply chain is now very visible and certainly heightened its role in every company and certainly across the system. Well, Mac, thanks again for joining us today to share your insight and outlook on the industrial real estate sector, a vital part of the goods movement system. And to our valued audience, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon for another episode of Supply Chain Insight, brought to you by the Port of Choice, the Port of Long Beach.